then I will turn it over to Josh to introduce our program for today.
So today our program is Dave Parker, our club's very own. He is, as you all know, the superintendent for Forest Grove, and he's here with a very relevant program about the schools reopening. So if you can all please welcome Dave Parker.
Today, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about returning to school. Schools are starting to make some changes. My agenda is to talk a little bit about the dates for return. And then I'll spend some time talking about layered risk reduction strategy, because of the big message that I'm trying to get out to our community is safety, which is why we believe it's safe for our kids to return to school. I'll talk a little bit about instructional models, and then kind of upcoming changes is kind of what I've got planned for today. So this is kind of where we've been in Washington County. What you can see there is coming into July, we were averaging right around 100 cases, down into the near 50 cases per 100,000 over a 2-week total. And then you see kind of late in October, November, we see the big wave that shot up. Currently, we're sitting down over here, we're at about 80. We saw a big decrease in January, and then now we're currently decreasing, but at a lower rate. And for us, we're ready to start getting back into school. When we hit 50 is where the governor previously had said we need to be opening our schools back up. So with that, I'll lead us into, here's kind of our dates to return. We had, in the school district, we had kind of gone through and communicated out a set of dates of returns that were staggered. And then I guess a week ago, the governor came out and made a new executive decision that all schools would be back on March 29th. Since that time, they've kind of looked at districts that already had plans, already had board motions and everything. And basically what they said is that if we're within 1 week of that March 29th, that we can continue with our plan. So here's kind of our plan. March 29th, 30th, and 31st, teachers will be moving back into their classrooms. Probably about 20% of our teachers have been coming into the schools. All the rest have been working from home. And so there's got to be an opportunity for them to move back into their classrooms. And then pre-K through 6 will be starting up again on April 5th. So that's the first half of our district. The second half of our district, our secondary schools, they finish their third quarter on April 13th. And so the way that we're doing our classes this year is basically they're covering half a semester of work in a quarter. And so those kids are going to get grades that go onto their transcripts on April 13th. So we're not going to move the secondary schools back into school until after they've finished their courses. On the 19th, all of our kids will get new courses and they'll be going to new teachers. And so it just didn't make sense to try and start before then. So that's kind of the dates. But what I want to spend some time on now is to talk through why we think kids should be coming back into school. And it starts with this PhD. His name's Dr. Corsi. He is the Dean of the Engineering and Computer Science at Portland State University, and he's an international expert in indoor air quality. And what I'm going to spend a little time talking about right now is kind of all of the safety things that we're putting into place so that we can come back to school. Dr. Corsi is probably the person that you're hearing most from about why and what we need to do in schools and in universities to make it safe. I'm going to throw in the chat here. Hang on one sec. Let me find my. I'll put it at the end of the show before we leave. I have this document, and I'll put it in the chat so you can grab it, because of really, I'm summarizing his work, but really Dr. Corsi is the expert on this, and he's got several YouTubes to listen to that'll kind of walk you through the whole thing. He spoke to, on February 24th, he spoke to superintendents and facility managers around ways that we could mitigate the risks for students. And then he's also talked in a national forum on this same information. So I'll get you the document later if you want to go look at some of the work around it. It's really, I'm a physics teacher, so actually the science on this is very interesting. So with that said, I want to talk about kind of what we're doing in schools for safety. But before we get there, let's talk about how this virus gets spread, because it's important to understand how we're mitigating the risks. The sources of emission, the virus isn't naked. It's always hitchhiking on something. And so that's either mucus or that's saliva, but it doesn't go anywhere without hitching a ride. And so the way in which we have to go about looking at safety is we have to look at how do we protect our kids from those particles? And those particles can be large and affected by gravity. And then some of the particles are aerosols and can stay airborne for a long period of time. I think the actual science says that by the time some of these aerosols are affected by gravity enough to hit the ground, they can move upwards of 2.5 kilometers. That's how long that they can stay suspended. For us, as we begin to look at how we're going to keep kids safe, we have to understand what these emission sources are: breathing, speaking, singing, and coughing. So the strategy that we're taking in schools is called layered risk reduction strategies. And basically, these are all things that you've probably heard about, and not any one of them is good enough to actually solve this problem for us in schools. But if we can take all of them together, that's where we get some of the safety. I'm going to show you in a little bit that we think, and according to the science, we've mitigated probably 96% of the risk of kids being back in their school spaces. And this is a lot of language here, but here's what I want you to know. The key to the entire pandemic is lowering the inhaled dose. That's how someone gets sick, is they inhale this virus, and the smaller we can make that dose, the safer our people are. And there's basically 4 variables here that go into this equation. And this is all the work of Dr. Corsi and his group. C is kind of the concentration, which is the closer you are to somebody who has it, the more concentrated the emissions are. Also, the B is kind of how quickly somebody's breathing. So if you're in a classroom and you are breathing hard, you are more at risk, or you're putting other people more at risk. The amount of time you spend in a space determines kind of your inhaled dose. And the last thing is kind of the deposition of particles, this F. We don't have much control over. And the reason I bring this up is that the way that we combat this is those 3 variables there: concentration, the breathing volume, and then the time and the space with someone who might be sick. So we're going to try the whole key here is it for us to keep that inhaled dose to a minimum. And so here's kind of our classrooms, and there's a couple of different ways that kids could get sick from this. The first is near field. If you're very close to somebody and they're emitting, those particles you can breathe them in, they can get deposited on surfaces around you. But the large particles, for the most part, are only a danger when you're close. So we have to deal with how are we going to get the large particles out of the air. Aerosols will continue to float around for quite a while. So that's where our ventilation begins to come into play here. We need to pump that air out of the space and clean it, and then return it to the space. So I've got kind of 2 things that we're worried about here: near field, stuff that's very close, and then far field, the aerosols that are being moved around the school. So ventilation, the first thing that during the 2019, they held before actually the COVID piece, they held a conference talking about epidemics, and specifically they started looking at how can we manage the hygiene in schools and university classrooms. And they've got a whole listing. This ASHRAE Epidemic Task Force has a whole listing of standards. But 62.1 standard is actually, they go through and calculate how many different air changes in a classroom is kind of the minimum standard for safe air. And what they found is that we need to have 3.4 air changes per hour for us to have a safe classroom. We've, during this period of time, we've gone out and measured our air changes per hour in all of our schools and our classrooms. We're currently at, there's no school that falls below that air changes per hour for the minimum indoor air quality. This was important because of one of the conversations we were having early on with teachers and with our students and parents is we couldn't articulate the safety. We couldn't articulate how much air was moving in our classrooms. We can do that now. The average is about 5.8 air changes per hour in our school district. And then I'm going to get to something that's interesting here, which is Dr. Corsi and Dr. Kevin Van Den Melenberg took all of this information from the ASHRAE conference, and they began to take some other modeling tools for how people get sick in indoor air spaces. And they've created a tool for schools to use. And what it does is it takes into account all of those layers that we talked about. The number of people in the room. We've reduced the number of people in the room right now. Are they masked up? How much air is in the room? How quickly is it changing? And with this tool, they've used it to analyze other outbreaks. And what they found is that their tool is actually producing results that are predictive of when a space is safe and when you should begin to worry about whether or not you're creating a situation where people could get sick. And so when I send you this, it's actually, again, if you're a science guy, this was a lot of fun for me to begin to manipulate. I've got a link here. You can get to it when I send you the presentation later. But the basic gist is we began to figure out what the values are for our spaces. We used 18 occupants. We used about 900 square feet is what our classrooms are. The ceiling heights are average around 9 feet. And we used our outdoor air supply. And what I began to do is calculate what our risk levels are. And I know this is a little hard to see, but basically what you've got here is you've got kind of a thermometer that shows you where the probability of somebody getting sick inside of the room is. And then it gives you kind of the, above the lungs there, that gives you kind of with 18 people in the room, the current probability of 18%, about 3 people we would expect to get sick in this classroom if we did nothing here. And on the right-hand side, you can see all of the values that I put into the model here. 18 occupants, our floor area is about 900 square feet. This is all in meters and stuff, but what I wanted to show you here is this is without masks. So if we just ran our regular school right now, with COVID being what it is, we would expect there's about an 18% chance that someone would get sick in that room if there was a COVID person in it. So the first thing I wanted to show you is as soon as I turn on masks, the percentage goes down to 6%. That means that we've mitigated 96% of the risk with the number of people in the room wearing masks, the outdoor air that we've upped all of our outside air. So like people are going to want to, we've got a lot of outside air being pumped into our schools. Normally we recycle a lot of air so that we save money on heating. Now we're pumping every bit of outside air that we can into our systems. But by simply turning on the masks, we're down to basically a 6%, 94% of our risks are mitigated in our classrooms. The other thing that we did in the school district is we wanted to go a little further. And what we did here is we actually added in portable air conditioners into every teaching space. And what they do is they add another 2.5 air changes per hour, which now puts us upwards of 8.2, 8.3 air changes per hour. And with that added into our situation, we're now down to about a 4% risk. Basically our classrooms, because our air is moving so much and the masks that the kids are wearing, basically we're in a place where I'm not sure how much lower risk I can get for our spaces. So we feel like we've now mitigated those risks. This is kind of the summary table of what we found as we went through it, which is basically no mask, no portable air conditioner. We're depending upon how long you're sitting in the classroom, there's about a 14 or an 18% risk that you might get sick. And as soon as we get into the mask, no portable air conditioner, or mask and a portable air conditioner, we're into a very low risk range given the models that we're using here. So I'm trying to get out to parents now and to our community and to my staff to make sure that everybody knows what this information is, because of up to this time, nobody's really understood the interaction of our ventilation, our masking, our social distancing. What does it mean numbers wise to how safe folks are coming in? One of the interesting things that we've got going is that as we begin to open schools, there's a whole set of, it's called Ready Schools Safe Learners. It's 140 different requirements that we have to meet to reopen our schools. There's a communicable diseases plan and logs and contact tracing. Movement within the school has to be changed. Everyone wears a mask. Social distancing is currently at 35 square feet per student. And this is an interesting one for us because of I've gotten a lot of questions. Why aren't you going every day? Or why aren't you going Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday? And the reason is with this social distancing requirement here of 35 square feet, I can only get half a classroom into a class. I can only host half of the students. There is a new science that is out within the last couple of weeks surrounding this distancing. And basically what it shows is if I go back to my little calculator there, calculating the risk, and I take it from 18 occupants up to 28, basically my risk doesn't change because the social distancing isn't the most important element. It's actually the mask. So we were kind of anticipating that the governor was going to change this requirement on Monday. That didn't happen, but I am expecting it to change for sure by next fall. My best guess right now is that we're going to start regular schools. There may still be a mask requirement, but we'll be in full classes. We'll be going every day and we'll be back to a more normal school by next fall. If I can move there before the end of the school year, I will. I think the first thing for me is just to get kids back into school and get everybody rolling on a pattern again, and then we'll kind of go from there. Cohorting, we had limitations of how many kids could interact with other kids. They removed that requirement on Monday. So now it used to be you couldn't have more than 100 interactions. In our secondary schools, it makes it really hard to operate our secondary schools in that kind of a model. Ventilation has been improved. And the last thing that I thought was really interesting is hygiene, because of, and the reason why I went through how the virus is transmitted is because of early on, we were thinking, well, here's a couple of things we were thinking. One is like we would get the kids into the room and then we'd have them stay. That's actually not the best idea because we have 5-6 air changes per hour. If I can get the kids out of the room for 20 minutes, I can go through 2 air changes in that room and they start over again. They walk back into a space where the air is clear. So another one that was kind of works opposite of what we were thinking is this issue of hygiene, because we are hiring more custodial to work nights. We're hiring more custodial to work during the day. But in talking to the experts on this, what they said is that's great, but really the most important thing that you can do is make sure kids' hands are clean a lot, because of the transmission of the virus is not, it could be airborne, but another way is they touch a surface that has it, that goes from their hands to their mouth, and then we've introduced it again. We're going to be, throughout our classes, they'll be kind of at regular intervals working on hand hygiene, whether through sanitizers or washing of hands. That actually turns out to be probably more important than the actual cleaning of those spaces. That will happen. We'll fog during the night so we kill everything. There's kind of this electrostatic fogging machines that we have purchased several years ago that will go through to sanitize the whole spaces. But that's kind of the basic plans around this. The current instructional models kind of look like this. Because of that square footage thing, basically we have half the class in for 2 days, and then we have the other half of class in the other 2 days. Times kind of, depending upon which grade level you are, the times differ a little bit. They run from 3 hours to 5 hours, just depending upon which grade level you are. The early pre-K and K we're doing what's called a non-concurrent model, where the teachers work with the kids at home and the kids in their rooms at different times. From 3 to 6, it's a concurrent model. So they're working with the kids at home and the kids in their space in a similar time period. We've hired in about 13 FTE of extra instructional aides to get more folks into the classrooms to help with that. And then 1 and 2, it's kind of depending upon the school and the grade levels, which one they're going to. They're working with their kids, figuring out which one's going to work better for them. And then, like everything, we're waiting for the changes. I don't think that I've gone more than 2 weeks without a change in the goalposts. Like a great example is that we had early part of this year, all of the mandates coming from the governor's office and from an ODE were mandatory. And then on December 23rd, the governor comes out and says, no, they're all flexible. You can choose to do them or not do them. With this latest executive order, everything becomes mandatory again. You will be in school on March 29th. So it's been a really challenging year and a half for everyone, right? For parents, for teachers. For us, it would be great to try and get to a place where we know where the goalposts are and we can start continuing to move towards them. That was probably more than everybody wanted to know, but that's kind of what's going on in schools right now. I can take some questions.
Yes, I have a question about how's this affecting finances? Because you've hired a lot of extra people and bought more equipment and bringing more outside air. It has to be, heated and treated, et cetera. What's this doing to the finances for the year?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we saved during the, let me put this, I'm going to put the link to this document in the chat. So if anyone wants to pull it down. That may not work. Maybe this works. The second one probably works better. At the end of last year, we did a couple of things. We did a layoff of 1 day a week for our staff, and we saved about $1.2 million that we pushed into this year's budget. We received stimulus money called ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 that we've also used to pay for a lot of the things that are extra. So extra custodial, the cleaning, PPE, all of those kinds of costs have been paid for with these federal grants. So at this point, we've got about a 15% ending fund balance, which is excellent right now. And as we head into next year, we're in about as good a position as we could be, as far as like what we may be able to do. Our problems are this, is it's going to be expensive reopening school, and it's going to be expensive next year. So we're still trying to save as much money as possible, knowing that there's a lot of things out in front of us. The ESSER 3 money, the $1.9 trillion stimulus fund that was just passed, brings to the district about $9.6 million. We will spend that on not only most of this latest stimulus will get focused on intervention, after school, teachers in the buildings to deal with the fact that we've had a year and a half of not the best learning environment, not as good as our environment is when we're in school. So money-wise, we're not in a bad spot right now. That 1.9 trillion is actually a 3-year grant. So it'll give us some strength over multiple years. That's the way we're thinking about it, is to spread these interventions over multiple years. Other questions?
Are any of these mitigations applicable to other contagious diseases like common colds and flu?
Yes. I think you'll see us manage the ventilation pieces. So the other thing that we did that I forgot to talk about is that what we've done is we purchased that portable air cleaner. And one of the things that this PhD brought up is that the portable air cleaner doesn't need to have UV light, and it doesn't need to have, it can be the important number on this cleaner is not kind of all the bells and whistles on it, but really how much clean air does it deliver per minute. And we were able to basically purchase these clean air units for about $250 a piece that do the job, and we got them for every space. So rather than, because originally some of the original units we were looking at were like $1,000 and had all these bells and whistles, and he basically said, yeah, that's not what you need. You just need something that's going to clean those particles out of the air and push back as much air as it can get. We tested out several models to kind of, there's some white noise that goes with these, but it wasn't bad. So we're off and moving on that.
What's the district's guidance for students on when they should stay home and when they should come in?
Yeah. So the guidance will go out to basically, if you're not feeling well, you need to stay home. Will have to be one of the mitigation pieces is we need to keep, we more than ever before, we need to make sure that sick kids are staying home, and sick staff. I should say that too, which is we need to make sure that everyone who's not feeling well stays home until we know what's going on. What we've found in other school districts around us is this quick exclusion piece. We're all doing CDL right now, so there's always like live comprehensive distance learning going on. So staying home isn't quite as disastrous as it would have been in former years because there's still instruction going on. So we'll be talking with parents about that. The pre-K through 6, there'll be a visual screening going on in the as kids enter the school. Secondary schools will ask parents to do that at home, for parents and kids to do that. The science on the visual screening is that it really doesn't impact the transmission. So they're not putting, they made it more flexible in this last round of guidelines because that's not what they're finding are the important pieces.
Dave?
Yeah.
Are all the teachers vaccinated?
So yes, there's still the folks in the district who didn't have direct interaction with kids are finishing up there, like myself. Those folks are finishing up their vaccination, but our teachers are elementary K through 6. They should be all the way through their vaccinations. Our secondary started, and specifically the high school started late, but they should be finishing up their vaccinations this week. So we're feeling we're pretty good. There's great news that came out on Thursday of last week. Pfizer, there's 2 studies out of Israel that show that if you have the Pfizer vaccine and you've got 2 vaccines in 2 weeks on top of that, that it prevents 97% of COVID after that and 94% of asymptomatic COVID. And what that means is basically the Pfizer vaccine, you aren't a carrier. So once you've been vaccinated, some of our staff and some of our folks are worried that if they're in this environment that they will somehow catch, even though they've been vaccinated, that they would catch COVID and then take it home. What the studies are showing, and like I said, it was just as of last Thursday, is that's not actually true. It's not 100%, but it's 94% of the time that is not a true statement. Now, that's just 2 studies, and the CDC hasn't come out and verified that yet. But that's encouraging news for us to get our schools open once our folks are vaccinated to get moving again. So that was good news for us.
Dave, did you have any significant number, or are you having a significant number who are refusing to be vaccinated?
So there are, because of the HIPAA laws, I can't really ask my employees if they got vaccinated. What we're doing is basically we've made it leaped over creeks and did everything possible to make sure that our people, we're currently like folks who we've been emailing and setting up appointments for 6 weeks now. And we've done everything possible. So the folks who aren't getting vaccinated now, that's on them. And we're starting school and they will need to be there. And if they don't want to be there, they either have to take a leave or they have to resign because we've got to get schools open. I believe we're above 80% of our folks vaccinated. I think the numbers they had down at the convention center is closer to 90% of all teachers have been vaccinated. So I think this is not going to be as big of an issue, but like I said, I can't actually ask my employees that.
Well, Dave, given that you can't ask them, how can you bar them from coming back if you don't know they've had the shot or not?
I won't bar them. It's just that they have to work and they'll have to take their chances with the current setup that we have.
So it's at their risk. They
Absolutely.
could give it to other people, but it's at their risk if they get it.
Correct.
Dave, you mentioned masks. Is there a particular mask that they're going to be wearing, or are they just the ones that they have now?
So there's some great science. I put a slide in the PDF that I shared with you. There's a slide at the very end of it that I didn't show, but I put it in there. And it links to this Dr. Corsi's research and the studies that he's basing all of this on. And what he showed is that basically if you wear a bandana, which has a very low, about 30% risk reduction with a bandana, but if both people are wearing the bandana, the risk reduction goes up to 54%. And if you have just a 2-ply cloth mask and both people have it on, your risk reduction is about 84%. So we're not gonna, we won't like demand that kids have a specific mask. What we quoted you today in the risk reduction was just a regular 2-ply cloth mask. But the danger there is actually a cloth mask does a decent job on this. Certainly a KN95 would do even better. You're getting closer to 99% risk reduction, but.
Dave, teachers are going to have quite a challenge, especially with the simulcast education, where they're teaching to the classroom and teaching to the Zoom audience at the same time for kids who either don't come back or are in the opposite cohort. What support is being given to teachers to be able to help them, not only manage that, but also to help manage what's going to be a significantly increased workload on the K through 12 teachers?
So a couple of things. One is that in November, we started a committee to look at these instructional models and specifically the concurrent simulcast model. And so there's been about 30 teachers who have been working on doing this for about 4 months. And so there's teachers at every school building who have done this. With that also goes, there's a bunch of technology that we purchased because if you need more screens, I've got my laptop screen and I got my big screen here. There's some cameras that you're going to need. There's some mics. And so we've just put in a purchase about 4 weeks ago for this extra technology. And it's all showing up in our district office. Over the next 2 weeks, they'll be pushing it out into the buildings. We've also increased the number of IAs. Most of the buildings have utilized the new IAs and the old IAs. They've kind of pushed, like during this period of time, our secretaries and some of our other staff, they've actually pushed into the classrooms to help in those classrooms because we don't need as much, there's not as many people in the building, so we haven't needed those people there. So that'll be part of the support. Just like last spring when we started into CDL the first time, we learned a lot and then we implemented some of those learnings in the fall. There's going to be a lot of learning from this concurrent model. I'm absolutely positive that it's not going to go super smooth. We haven't had to do this so far. When you're in person, you're teaching to everybody in person. We went to CDL and we're teaching everybody not in person, but it's still only one thing. It's still one way of doing it. Now we're about to try and work on 2 things. Which is kids in person and kids at home. They split the model so the morning time is kind of the concurrent with kids, and then in the afternoon they'll do kids who need more. They'll start doing some of the intervention in the afternoon when the other kids are doing PE and music and some of those other pieces, the specials. but it's going to be a challenge, Blake. I'll just, I'm absolutely positive. I'll also just bring it up because I know I wrote about it in the Rototiller. And hey, everybody in the school district right now, we're tired. We are weary, and this challenge. It's why when the governor just pushed out $325 million worth of support for summer school, that's awesome. Except for I'm not sure I'm going to have a teaching staff to do it. And so there's going to be some real challenges around just rejuvenating our people and getting back into school.
Dave, what has the impact been on grades?
So what I think we've seen, and it's why you're seeing a lot more push to get back into school. In the fall, I think we transitioned into CDL with most kids doing pretty well. And a lot of our kids are still doing well in CDL. I think what we've seen over the last 2 months is a real fatigue in our students. And we're seeing grades being impacted in very significant ways. And so I think that's a big push for us trying to get back, and especially our kids who are most at risk are the ones who are suffering the most, right? And probably need the most help. We're starting to run some Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday sessions for seniors and doing some other kind of intervention pieces, but yeah.
Do we have any other questions for Dave?
See, Howard's got his hand up.
Hey, Dave, I just want to share with you that, and Paul can concur, with the bringing back of athletics, the joy that's in the students' faces, and they have some rules that they must follow. I mean, last night we had fans at the soccer game for the first time, and there were rules they had to follow. We have not seen, or I have not seen, any student not follow the rules. I mean, they're playing soccer games, they're wearing masks, they're sitting 6 feet apart. Do you think that when the students come back, because they get to come back, that the following of rules will be adhered to probably a little bit more so because they do get to be back? I mean, it's joyful. It is absolutely joyful to watch competition, and Paul can chime in. We used to do for introductions, they would shake hands. Now they just stand. They've adapted based on what's going on because they get to play. I mean, and the key word there is play. They get to associate with people that they haven't seen. I mean, when I'm talking about competitors that they haven't seen for over a year. And just the joy in those students. And when we walk around the soccer field and they're sitting 6 feet apart, they have their masks on, they're doing, when I say, hey, only 2 of you in the bathroom at a time, there's nobody going, well, that's ridiculous. I mean, everybody's adhering to the rules. So do you suspect that will be part of the?
Yeah, I think you said it pretty well. I don't know if I can improve on that, Howard, but the basic gist is I think kids are ready to be back at school and to do whatever we need to do to start getting back. It's interesting because we're going to run 3 seasons in about 2.5 months. Right. So there's a lot of athletics about to happen here, and that's fun. I mean, it's good. Our coaches, I will just say, our coaches have been trying to. We've been running warm-ups, like running, and they've been throughout this whole thing, they've been running some sport just to keep kids moving. It's like, but it's finally we're able to get back into where you can play the sport that you love. So
I do have a question. Is it true in Forest Grove that if you maybe start back in the classroom and it's not working, that you can opt to go back to distance learning from your house?
Yeah, you can. I think what we're asking folks to do is just give us warning. The biggest issue is like the reason we've set up our system the way we can is it allows some teachers didn't have to get new teachers. I didn't have to redivide kids up. And if you change your mind, we can accommodate that. And so, but we just need a little warning.
Well, I appreciate your efforts in this. I think the school district's in great hands, so thank you for what you're doing.
Thanks, Howard.
So
Just
I
as a,
can,
just as a warning, Paul and Howard, you know, at the college level where our conferences have a mandate for no fans at all. And we have started running into some issues with people not following the rules or, you know, entering the venue when they're not supposed to. So probably as more athletics take place, there probably will be more issues with, you know, both students and parents that are, you know, not as understanding for the rules, but it's great to hear that so far that hasn't been an issue in Forest Grove.
Well, I won't say that. The parents are still where there's some challenges around spectators, but I would say the kids are doing great.
Right. Well, thank you, Dave. I think we can all appreciate how much, you know, you guys have been just receptive to going with the flow and to making these changes and to implement them. And then it changes again. And as frustrating as it is for parents and the kids, I mean, you guys are the ones that are having to create these plans when there's no map to follow. So we appreciate your efforts so much. And we cannot wait to get back to school and sports.